Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Saturday night special. As you guys know this, hello everybody, welcome to Saturday night. Welcome to, well, my 25 minutes to half an hour, me talking about cars, motors, races, um, my highlights of, races and stuff like that, like the Le Mans 24, Lime Rock Park, Spa races, and all this other stuff, Nürburgring 24, all that other stuff, and racing engines and racing technology in general. So hello everybody, and I hope you guys enjoy this one, especially for Chevy fans out there and for big buck fans out there. I got a special treat for you guys tonight. Tonight I'm going to talk about maybe one of the most interesting engines to come out of Chevrolet's repertoire, and probably an engine that still has a legacy today, and actually in a lot of people's minds. And it's quite the racing legend. And that is the story of Chevrolet's 427. So the 427 was back in the 1960s. So back in the early 1960s, even before the whole muscle car thing started to take off, because the muscle car era, for those of you who don't know, started in 1964, and it really kind of took off then because it was cheap, because the market was revolutionized. Because back then, if you wanted a production car that could go over 100 miles an hour, 150 miles an hour, or something like that, and you wanted to go fast, you had to go to the Europeans. So you had to buy Ferrari, Maserati, Mercedes-Benz, Porsche, who were kind of starting out at the time in the late 60s. So you had to go to them to get cars that would not only go fast in a straight line, but also give you that 100 plus mile an hour top speed and go 150, 160, 170. In 1960, already in the 1960s, early 60s, some of the Ferraris were top at 165, 170, 175 miles an hour. The super fast, this 500 super fast from the 330 body style, those were already going. The early 60s one, the mid to late 60s ones were already doing about 160 and 160, 170-ish and stuff like that. So Corvette needed a motor that would compete with these engines at racetracks like Le Mans, Spa, the Nürburgring, and Sebring and Daytona. And up to that point, the best racing engines to come out of one of the best racing engines that kind of started the whole thing was the invention of the small block V8. And I told you guys the history of that one like 2-3 years, like maybe a couple of years ago, when I wanted to, just one of my random topics. So the small block V8 started out as a 265 cubic inch V8 with a single carburetor, about 162 horsepower, and that was in 1950. That was in 1955, and the Corvette would get the hottest one at 195 horsepower. That would eventually make its way to the 283 in 1957, and then would make its way into the 327 fuel-injected motor. The top fuel-injected motor would be the 327 360 horse, and that car was capable of 130, 140 miles an hour, depending on 130, 140, 550, depending on the gearing. I know the race car, 1960 race car, definitely the 1960 Le Mans winning race car definitely was able to do 360 horsepower. Well, at 283, and I think it had around 283, and I think it had around 100 and I think at one point it had 315 horsepower, but I think they probably got a little bit more out of it. And in 1961 and 1962, we eventually got the 362. We got the 327, but Corvette wasn't the one who had the biggest motor. Usually there was a rule that all automakers had. You couldn't put a certain size motor into a certain car. Like they couldn't put a 400 cubic inch engine in a Corvette because it wouldn't have been because GM at the time would have a racing ban later in the 60s, and they would tell teams that you couldn't race, and that's the reason why they didn't want a 400 cubic inch engine in a car, or a big block engine in a car the size of the Corvette, because they were concerned that if they were able to race it, the people on the street would buy it, and they weren't going to really do that because they were already reeling, because Ralph Nader was already starting to talk about safety. He did stuff on Cadillac and all the fins and all the tail fins on the back of the car impaling people and stuff like that. And yeah, so Corvette had a racing ban on their cars, and the idea of putting a 400 cubic inch engine into a Corvette would have been a really big thing. But the thing that really kind of changed all that and really kind of changed all the market for a lot of people was 1960, 1961. Chevrolet came up with a motor called a 348, and it would be in the Impala, the 1950s and the late 1950s Impalas. It was supposed to be a police interceptor motor. It would be in a lot of the sedans and stuff like that. It was meant to go very fast. Although it wasn't very good for the racetrack, and General Motors kind of knew that. So what they did was they came up with a motor called the 409. 409, the Beach Boys song. So the 409 came out, and Chevrolet in the Corvette division was like, okay, so they got the 409. The 409 was the first big engine that Chevrolet actually put into their cars. I know there was a couple Pontiacs and a couple Pontiacs that had a 420, that had a 421, and that had the 421 Super Duty and stuff like that would come later in the decade. But that was Pontiac, because Pontiac was more of a drag racing thing, not a road racing outfit. But the problem with the Impala SS was that it was a little too expensive for people like you and me to buy, because I think an Impala SS, if I'm not mistaken, with a 409 could drag upwards option wise up to like $4,000 or something like that, $4,000 or $5,000, depending on what you got it and what spec you got on and what spec you did on it. And the first time they used to race them was either in drag racing or in Dan Gurney's case. He actually went over to England and took a stock 409 and with 400 horsepower or 425 horsepower, and he actually was beating Jaguar. He was beating the Jaguars and the Alfa Romeos and all this other stuff that could whiz around in the corners, but on the straights it could go very, very fast. And then Ford got into that with their Galaxy, but when they started raiding the continent with their racing prowess, so Ford got in on it with their 406 and then their 427 lightweight Galaxies. Even though they weren't lightweight, they were like 3,500 pounds. But Pontiac kind of set the tone in 1963. And started thinking of an idea to put out something for 1964 into 1965. And John DeLorean, who we know made the DeLorean car, Back to the Future, 88 miles an hour, 1.61 million gigawatts or whatever it is. And his first big outlandish idea was the Pontiac GTO. And there was a rule, I think, in General Motors at the time where you couldn't put an engine no larger than 400 cubic inches in an intermediate body. And John DeLorean and his crack team of guys came up with the 389, put it in a Pontiac Tempest, and put the package on it for the Pontiac GTO. It was the Pontiac Le Mans Tempest. It was the Pontiac Le Mans, the Pontiac Tempest GTO. And I know it's a big long name, but it actually sold like hotcakes because it started out in life with about 325, and I think it had about 348 or 350 horsepower by the time it was done. And car was 3,500 pounds, a good power to weight ratio, 4-speed. And I think the car costs, $27,000 to $3,000. And a lot of people are like, okay, so why are we spending $4,000 to $5,000 on a pallet for 425 horsepower when we can get a power to weight ratio, and we can get it here pretty cheap, and we can also tune this car up to make more power. And that got Chevrolet thinking in 1964, well, we need our 396, well, we need our 380 or 390 cubic inch engine of our own, because we got to stay under the rule, because it can't be in the Corvette because it's a small car. So a 400 cubic inch engine couldn't stay in the small car. We'd have to wait a couple of years. So they went to work on a mystery engine in 1963 called the Mystery Engine, and it was 396 cubic inches. And NASCAR actually didn't want it in the series because it was a special engine, and Chevrolet kind of understood it was very good. It had very good power. It had about 300. At the beginning of its lifetime, it would have 325 and 350 and 375. I think by 1964, 1965, it would have the ability to have almost 425 horsepower, and that was the drag racing cars, and the drag racing cars, because they put in the Chevy Malibu and and a couple of the and I think the Nova as well. When the Nova grew up, they put it in the 320. They put the 350, 396 in the Nova as well, but that wouldn't come to much later in its lifetime. And Chevrolet said, well, we need a bigger engine. And they looked at it, and they kind of sat there and they said, well, the Corvette's a sports car, so we can put better, so we have different rules. And so they went to General Motors, I believe, and they told them, I said, hey, the Corvette is not an intermediate car. It's not a small car. It's, at the time, I think the Corvette was 3,000 pounds, like 29 to 3,000 pounds. That's what the 327. I think the 396, I think it was about 3,300 pounds. And they had to lighten it. And they were like, hey, let's come up with a motor that's bigger than, we can come up with a motor. So they said, oh yeah, you guys can come up with a motor this big. And at the time, the Hemi was starting to come through, so they knew they were going to have to do that. And then they knew the 427 for the Cobra was starting to come out, because around this time, 1964, 1965, Ford was already promoting the 427 for the NASCAR engine, and was already promoting that car for the NASCAR engine, and presumably they were, sorry if the light died. I think my light bulb just died, so sorry if it got a little dark in here, but sorry. I'll have to replace that soon, but hey, Hey, I said 427, and I think it blew the light out. That's how powerful this motor was. Um, so so what happened was is they said, hey, we're gonna put this engine in there because Ford was winning with that, and they were already winning in NASCAR. Around this time, Dodge was struggling in NASCAR with the power to weight, and Ford was started storging ahead with this great 327. And I think the 427 was a mystery motor engine that they put in, and I think NASCAR banned it wrong with the 396, and it wasn't cutting the mustard. So they sat there and they were like, yeah, we're gonna put this in the Corvette, and we're gonna put this in the Chevelle, and we can put this in a lot of race cars. So 1966 was the final. So 1966, 1967 were kind of the first years where they could actually put a motor that was strong enough to keep up with Ferrari. And in 1967, they actually there was actually and the Yenko cars would have it, but I'll get into that in a moment. So there was a guy who, so there was guys like Bob Bondurant and a bunch of other guys that that wanted this engine and wanted to race it. So one of the cars was entered in the 1967 Le Mans 24-hour. Car when it was, so they built an engine called the L88. So you could get it in a couple of different states of tune, I believe. So I know you could get in the L88, which was the ultimate racing engine, and there was also a couple of other ones, a couple lesser ones that had lesser power. I think the lowest you could get was 390. The most you could get was 1967, to my knowledge, 435, but the L88 was listed at 430. So everyone was like, oh yeah, it's probably got 5 less horsepower, so it can last in the drag racing, so it can last in race cars, so it won't blow up. That's not the case. It was done for insurance purposes, because they needed to sell the 427 L88 to street racers, to street cars, much like the Hemi, the 427, and the Galaxies, and the Cobras and stuff like that. And they underrated it for insurance purposes because insurance rates started going up. And the engine was very legendary. It was very good, and it was very well done. Very strong engine. It could make power well. It was and as I said, with the L88 in it, it was making around 560 horsepower, and the car could do 170 miles an hour. And actually, on the Mulsanne Straight, on 1967, actually did 171 to the Ferrari, to the near closest Ferraris. It was either 100 and I think it was either 171, 172, 173. I can't remember, but it was 173. And I believe the Ferrari only did like 150, 151, 152 somewhere. And people were like, oh, so this motor can do this. So Chevrolet was like, oh, so it can do endurance racing too. And a lot of people used to do it, used to take it to Daytona. And a lot of people took it drag racing. And the one good thing about the 427 is it really didn't need to rev high. It really didn't need to rev a heck of a lot because it was meant to be a race car engine that was light, very powerful, but it had low RPM, so it could last during races. And it could take a lot of abuse. So, and Chevrolet kind of knew that after watching it win and actually have some good successes at places like Willow Springs and Daytona and all other places, they could really outstretch the competition. They looked at the body of the C2 Corvette and they noticed it was aerodynamic but not very good. So that's the reason why in 1968 they came up with the Mako Shark concept, which would come into the Stingray from 1969 all the way to 1975. And between 1968 and 1970, that would be the engine to have in a Corvette, in a race car Corvette, because after that it would become the the LS5, the LS6, 454, but that's another story for another day. So it got an upgrade in power, so it went from 400. It went from, I think in the factory, it went from 430 to 450 horsepower. Still underrated. It was doing about 580. And it was able to do 170, 180 miles an hour. And some people, if you had the right aerodynamics, the car could do 190 to 200. Owens Corning fiberglass, and Tony Lorenzo had a SCCA spec car and a FIA / IMSA / sports car style car. The IMSA car was a closed top car that had that could have the roof bolted on it. Actually, it was a hardtop convertible, and it had the L88 480 horsepower, and it was meant to kind of smash the Cobras into. It was kind of meant to rival the Cobra Daytonas as well. The Cobra Daytonas could go about 180, 170, 180 back then, 190 with their 289, 350 horsepower. Great car as well with the 289. But the Owens Corning fiberglass and a bunch of other teams could actually get a lot out of the Corvette. And in fact, I think in 68, 69, 70, I think it was the car to have. You could have the C2 Corvette, but a lot of people had C3s by 1970. It was kind of looking outdated. And the 427 got some publicity in the Camaro. The Chevelle had it for a Z11, and Don Yanko would put it in a couple of his cars. And it was a really nice tunable car, great drag racing engine. A lot of the Fords had trouble with it because they were able to get up to like 600. And in NASCAR, it was also very good in some of the big Impalas and some of the super sports. And this was when they were kind of winning, when Ford was kind of winning everything, and Chevrolet was kind of in the middle. This was in the middle, and the Plymouth was not too far behind. But the car could win NASCAR races. The car was very good, and it was kind of an amazing time. But 1971, 72, 73 is kind of what spelled the end for the muscle car era. In 1971, the 350 had been out since, the 350 kind of had been out since 1960, 1966, 1967. So the 350 would kind of be the motor to have in the 70s. So in 71, 72, the Corvette got the 454, and that kind of spelt the end, or so they thought, for the 427. The 427 was a great motor. I mean, it was only they only put it in production for for maybe 5 years, and they got rid of it, and then they mothballed it in the 1973, 1974, 75, 76. We got the 350 LT engine, and its horsepower getting sucked away by the emissions regulations, and it would get sucked down to 165 horsepower by 1976. And then everybody was like, okay, 427's done, big blocks are done, Chevelles went away, all this other stuff. Until many years later, when I was growing up, the name 427 came back, but not in a production car. There would be a couple of Camaros that would have 427s. There would be a couple of Corvettes that were prototypes that would have 427s, but not real but no real street car because of emissions regulations and fuel being more expensive in the 70s and 80s and 90s. And plus we had a recession in the early 90s, 91, 92, 93, 94, and so on and so forth. And it wasn't until 1997 that talk of a Corvette race car would come out, and the car would have a 6-liter V8, and everybody was like, oh, so the car is going to have a 366 cubic inch. Big block engines are back. And Corvette was facing another dilemma. There were new sports cars coming out, and they had to find an engine to race Porsche, McLaren, Dodge Viper, which was one of my favorite cars until I discovered the Corvette. My fan favorite Corvette, my fan favorite was the Dodge Viper back then. I was in love with the Dodge Viper GTSR and the RT10 or whatnot. The Vipers used to be all conquering in the 90s when I was a kid, or internationally and here in the U.S. But in 1998, 99, the race team headed by Doug Feehan and Pratt and Miller, Gary Pratt, and I forget the other guy's name, ended up teaming up to make and put the 427 back into the car. 1999 was more of a learning year. For those of you guys I'm not going to put the photos up on the screen because unfortunately YouTube would crucify me. Fortunately, it should be an educational site. I don't understand this. Ada Millward doesn't understand it either. But so in 99, they had a 6-liter V8. They got no victories because they had to go up against Porsche and Dodge and Ferrari with some of their cars. And then in 2000, the 427 came back and they started winning everything. They won a couple races, and I think they won Petit Le Mans. I don't think they won Le Mans. I think that went to Dodge. And then when they saw what the car can do in a couple of the victories that happened in 2000, they ended up saying, oh, hey, so the 427 is here to stay. And then everybody was like, oh, yay, so now the Corvette's going to get a 427. Unfortunately, that never happened in the C5 generation. That wouldn't happen for another... That engine would not come out in a Corvette for another 6 years. So another 5-6 years. So in 2000, 2001, in 2002, Corvette actually won a lot of races. They got stiff competition from Porsche, Ferrari, and Saleen and Dodge at some points. They even broke the winning streak for Dodge in 2000 at Texas Motor Speedway, their first victory. And they won Petit Le Mans 2000, and then they carried on 2001 when all that competition went away and they won their first championship. Ferrari came in and obviously started ruffling feathers. In 2003, same thing, ruffled feathers. Ferrari won Le Mans, and I think the next year they won it. And still no 427 in the road car. But the one good thing about the 427, for anybody who has been to a racetrack and has heard a C5R or a C6R, car that I'm about to show you in a minute, the noise is amazing. So the LS6, which was based on the Z06 engine, would be expanded into the 427. And then eventually in 2004, the C6 would come out, and the C6 would come out in 2004, and the 2005 Corvette would come out in 2004. Excuse me, and then we'd get the 427 in the C6R, which is this car right here, my favorite car of all time. This is Laguna Seca winner in 2005. One of 1,500 of 6,000 vehicles. Feast your eyes on this yellow beauty. 427 cubic inch, 590 horsepower. I think the one that they had in the C5R was 625, and I think went down to 570 around the time the new regulations came out. Probably slowed down Ferrari, because Ferrari and Corvette were starting to really speed around these cars. And this car actually was able to actually outgun the Audi R8 on the straightaways at Le Mans in 2005. It was that fast. 508 horsepower in a car weighing 2,500 pounds. This car weighed 2,500 pounds. I remember hearing this car at Lime Rock in 2006, in 2007 for the first time. Man, was it a sound. And eventually in 2006, the LS7 would come out, and we get the 427 in the Z06. Took them a long time, but they did it anyway. So, yeah. The 427 would run from the year 2006 all the way to 2013, which was the conclusion of the C6 generation. We haven't seen a 427 in the C7 because they went with a supercharged, because eventually because in mid 2008 they would size up the small block to the LS3, and then eventually in 2014 we get the LT1 back. And it was also in 2009 where the 427 and the Corvette stopped being used in 2009. In 2010 they went to a 5.5 liter small block V8. So in the Z06 in itself, when they first came out in 2006, it had 505 horsepower. It really had 425 because of crank loss. And it was able to go 190 miles an hour. It was track tested. I think it went like 195 or something like that. Actually, I think it went like 190. It was track tested to 190 miles an hour. I think it went 196, 187. No, it was clocked, even though it was tested by General Motors at 198, probably under ideal conditions, because General Motors, well, they just want you to buy the car. Oh, it's a 190 mile an hour car. And it was a great sounding car. A lot of people thought, oh, this is such a great engine. And then eventually, we get the Camaro back, and they put a 427 in a Z28R in 2016, 2017, but it's another story. But yeah, the 427 is a very good engine, and it all started, and you got to remember, it all started its roots at the basic level of 400, almost 400 and 265 cubic inches, or I think it's 4.3 liters. Yeah, I think it's 4.3 liters. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's 4.3 liters, yeah. Yeah, it's 4.3 liters because, it's a 4.3 liter engine, and it did very well, or 4.2 or 4.3, I can't remember. It did very well for its first time. It did very well for the time, and it did very well for the time. And of course, it eventually went up to 3.2. It kind of started out small as a 265 V8. Then it was 283. Then it was the 327. The 350, then the 396, then the 427, then the 454, then it died out. And then we didn't get back till 2006. So small beginnings to big time. So yeah, it's an engine that has an impact, on me as a muscle car fan, because I like the engine. It's very strong. It's very powerful. It does what it needs to do, and that's win races. The 427, if I'm not mistaken, has won. The 427 in the Corvette, of course, I think has won. Corvette C5R. so it would be a K-Tech LS1R, and then it would be the 427 from 1999 until 2000, even though it started in 2000. And it was put to a 5-speed manual in 1999 to 2002, and then the 6-speed manual from 2002 to 2003. Then they had a sequential manual, the up and down, not this thing. The Corvette C5R, which has the 427, I think it would win. I think it won most of all of its races with the 427. So, and the Grand Prix of Texas in 2000 was the first one. The last one was Monterey Sports Car Championships, and it would win 4 team championships and 4 manufacturers championships. Very successful engine. The C6R, which would have the same engine. So race victories, it would have so its last victory in the 427 form would be at the Spa-Francorchamps qualifying race at for Manacroc Racing. So they had 59 wins. So this engine in Corvette Racing's time had over 80 victories. And I believe those Owens Corning fiberglass cars won I think 30 races or something like that. So the 427, the L88, so the LS7R, the LS1R, the L88, and that mystery NASCAR engine, I believe won twice. So the engine's pretty successful. I think over a couple hundred and I think it had a couple hundred victories. It had a couple hundred victories. So very interesting engine, very successful engine. And it all started, as I said, with the 286. Not the 286, the 265 small block. So, and I probably wouldn't be a racing fan if the 427 didn't exist. So, and I wouldn't be a Corvette fan if I ever find a Z06 for decent money, which I probably won't, in my lifetime, I'm definitely gonna go take a test drive and try to just see what it's all like. And if I could slim down and maybe even drive one of the race cars before this electric boogaloo or hobbaloo starts coming around. So, and I deeply cherish these cars. I mean, we gotta. I know the electric stuff is coming our way, but you gotta cherish these huge ground pounding monsters. I mean, when I first heard this thing at Lime Rock back in 2007 during the warm up, your hairs on your arm stand up and you get goosebumps when you hear this thing going by. It's like nothing else, and it drowns everything else out. Porsches, BMWs, nothing comes close to this car's scream. This car's scream, not scream, but freaking growl. The car's scream now with the C8R, but so yeah, guys. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I hope you guys learned something tonight. I'm gonna be uploading this in like 15 minutes, so it'll be good for 9 o'clock. So you guys have been amazing. You guys have been amazing this these first couple of years, these many years. So I thought I'd give you guys a special racing episode. I hope you guys enjoy this episode, and I hope you guys love it to death, and you guys get to see it over the rest of the weekend and into the weekday. So this is Mike Camone for an automotive radio show, telling you guys the history of the 427 cubic inch engine that changed Chevrolet, that changed not only the automotive industry and racing engines, but also in production technology, and kind of helping to stick it to Ferrari, Porsche, BMW, McLaren, and everybody else. So, and it's set many production car records and many track records with their big block motors. So, I hope you guys learned something. And as always, I'll see you guys tomorrow for a regular episode and a regular vlog of not the Gear Change Show. So I'll see you guys for episode 6 tomorrow, I believe. I think so. Yeah, I'll see you guys for episode 6, and then see you guys for episode 7 on Monday. So yeah, I'll see you guys then, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and this was another Gear Change Show from the Camone's Automotive Radio Show for like 45 minutes. So God bless America. Long live the V8. Long live gas engines. And long live the spirit of maybe the greatest engine ever made, the Chevrolet 427 big block. If you guys, when you guys are done with this one, make sure you guys make sure you guys look up 427 Corvette race motor. You guys will not be disappointed at the noise. And try to make your way to a racetrack. If you guys see one, make sure you guys stand right there at the track and see it rumble. It's amazing. It's ground pounder. So I'll see you guys later, and I'll catch you guys next time. I'll catch you guys next weekend for another Gear Change Show. I don't know what the topic is going to be. I'll tell you guys probably, I don't know, Wednesday night probably. So yeah, I'll see you guys then. Hope you guys enjoy yourselves, and good night. Long live that 427. Yeah.